Hello, and welcome back to another analysis of Deadlock Hero Archetypes. As mentioned previously, Deadlock is a game that takes many classic literary archetypes and flips them on their head in unique ways. Today's literary archetype that we'll be talking about is werewolves. Ah, the werewolf, the shapeshifter that can change from human to wolf and vice versa. One of the most common and popular monster tropes, up there with vampires. Werewolves have existed in folklore for as long as man and wolf have existed simultaneously. One theory on the origins of the werewolf comes from when man would don the pelt of wolves, causing others to believe that they were seeing some kind of man-wolf hybrid. When the werewolf transforms, they are oftentimes an amalgamation of wolf and man, but typically are more humanoid, anthropomorphic versions of the wolf. In other mediums, they transform fully into the wolf. The method of becoming a werewolf varies, but the most popular method is through the bite of another werewolf, only being able to be cured by killing the original werewolf. Some other methods include demonic possession or pacts with the devil. Additionally, in some cases, it can be passed down genetically. This is the method that we'll be focusing on today. Due to the werewolf folklore, this would lead us to get the werewolf trope. It wasn't until the rise of Gothic horror in the 19th century that the werewolf trope as we know it now would become popularized. It wasn't until this that we would get a lot of the popular tropes that we now associate with werewolves, things like silver being something that's used to kill the werewolf, and full moons being something that causes the human to transform into the wolf. To talk more about the subject of werewolves in literature, I wanted to reach out to an expert on the subject and get some of his thoughts and opinions on the genre. I think you could just introduce yourself, kind of say who you are and what you do in the werewolf literature kind of realm.
Yes, I'm David Delbar. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Chicago in classics and comparative literature. And one of my areas of research are werewolves in all forms of media representation.
Awesome. Yeah. So one of the first questions I wanted to ask you on the topic of werewolves in literature is so what do you consider to be some of the essential features of a werewolf?
Hmm. Well, unlike Frankenstein or Dracula, we don't really have a one essential text that sort of anchors werewolf representations in media. So there's a lot of variation. Uh, what I usually am looking for is, something that combines the human and the wolf in some form. That could be metaphorical, a literal transformation, psychological, uh, and it could be caused by any number of reasons. Etymologically, the English term werewolf is literally just a combination of the Old English wer, which is man, and wolf. So it's man wolf. Uh, that is essentially a werewolf.
Okay. And I when reading Brian J. Frost's Essential Guide to Werewolf Literature, he talked a bit about how there was the origin of the werewolf, the origin of the werewolf, in folklore and myth, and then how it kind of went from the folklore into how it's kind of depicted now, like the introduction of werewolves in fiction. Um, so I guess next question I have is how is the modern werewolf different from how it used to be? So this werewolf trope that we have in fiction and how it's different from the kind of myth of a werewolf.
Yeah, the werewolf myth has gone through a lot of changes over time. Some of the oldest representations, like in the Epic of Gilgamesh and some of the ancient Greek representations, were all about curses from gods. And a lot of it was being transformed into a wolf against one's will, and the way that one was ostracized from society by being turned into a wolf and sort of pushed out from among your fellow humans. Uh, Later on, we get more sympathetic werewolves in the Celtic tradition, where it's a curse by some sorcerer or whatever, and the person usually tries to overcome it. But we also have another strain, particularly in the Nordic or Germanic mythologies, about a fierce sort of werewolf associated with the warrior class. And this could go all the way back to like Indo-European war bands. Thousands of years ago, when young men were tending to cattle and were imitating the sort of ferocity of the wolf when they were hunting or stealing cattle from other bands of young men. So even at that point, the I think people recognized that there was a duality to aggression in humans. On the one hand, it's really useful to have aggression when you are hunting or defending your people in martial combat, but it's not always easy to turn that aggression off, and sometimes you end up turning it on your own people, and that becomes the sort of perennial risk of the werewolf. Uh, as time went on, I think that a big change that happened was the introduction of the theories of Sigmund Freud and the idea of the unconscious mind and the id in particular, the sort of idea of the primal instincts that are still with humans. And Freud himself analyzed one patient that he has sort of become nicknamed the Wolf Man, who did not believe himself a werewolf, but had dreams of wolves and a wolf phobia. And so Freud psychoanalyzed him, and that's part of where that's one way that the werewolf myth ended up changing over time. It, we became much more focused on the sort of interiority and subjective experience of the werewolf after Freud.
Mm-hmm.
It was less about um, a person turning into a wolf to steal or to eat people as a monster, and it's became much more about what is the experience of a person who is now a wolf and sort of having this interior struggle about what that means for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was actually thinking quite a bit about the what you mentioned, this like kind of bestial aggression and it's the inability to turn it off. And one thing that I did notice with the werewolf trope is that it shares a lot of similarities to the Jekyll and Hyde kind of themes of having these bestial urges within and it slowly kind of like taking over and like having like a hard time controlling it, having a hard time like turning it off, having a hard time determining when it comes and goes. Um, so, what are your thoughts on kind of that?
Yeah, Jekyll and Hyde's fascinating. It definitely has this idea of failed repression. To use a Freudian term again. Dr. Jekyll wants to let loose and enjoy sort of the pleasures of life without have the sort of guilt of society. And this magic elixir is what allows him to do that without having any of the consequences follow him. But the idea there is that by giving up repression even temporarily, it starts to sort of overwhelm his ego, his more socialized aspect. Werewolves can be similar. I would say that most werewolves, there are some that deliberately become werewolves, but the vast majority, it is something that is done to them,
Mm-hmm.
either through, the later idea of being bitten by a werewolf or an enchantment or uh, some other sort of thing. And the ones that do so willingly are usually quite happy being a werewolf. Um, they do it. Often they're the villain, and there's the ones that are sort of trying to be stopped. Uh, but they deliberately wanted to become werewolves to have some sort of increased power or access to food, being able to steal from other people. Yeah, a lot of the older Germanic stories are about um, werewolves stealing cattle and sheep from their neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I guess that would be a difference, but yeah, a similarity is that this idea of an uncontrollable, um, primitive urges that sort of stay with humans even to today.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's an interesting development, particularly in European and European colonies like America, um, where there's this idea of men in particular, but women too, that there should always be sort of in control of themselves, this sort of enlightenment idea of rationality. Uh, and that's, the ideal way to be. And then there's the sort of horror of the fact that you still are tied to your animalness,
Mm-hmm.
that your rational mind can be overwhelmed by, um, uncontrollable bestial urges, whether that's for blood or sex or not wanting to work in an office cubicle.
That
So,
yeah, that's definitely something that I noticed in like the werewolf like trope. This like fear of loss of control, fear of hurting people that we love. This beast that we have that hurts people, and just being so afraid of this like loss of control. And I've noticed that that theme kind of pops up a lot in a lot of like modern iterations of like werewolf literature.
yeah, I would say that as we've gotten closer to modern day, there's certainly this more idea of the romantic werewolf, not just, the romance aspect of it, like romance novels, but this idea of wanting to reconnect to that primitive side of humanity, right? We have this idea that there was some sort of vigor or liberation or freedom that came with living outside of the trappings of society, and a desire to sort of return to that, at least temporarily, as a werewolf.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have various iterations like wolf walkers, or um, I'm trying to think of others off the top of my head, but werewolves end up being something desirable, even if it comes with complications to people's lives. And this is also sort of a trend to sort of rehabilitate the monster. I think that uh, in the last 20 years or so, uh, there's been a big uh, reimagining of lots of different stories about monsters, and trying to sort of tell this perspective from the monster side. Uh, Sort of an aspect of postmodernism where we realize that there are multiple perspectives from every angle, uh, and that one person's monster is another person's tragic hero.
Mm-hmm. As we talked about with David, one concept that is very prevalent in werewolf media is the beast within. This theme in the werewolf genre is meant to represent the idea that these bestial urges are inevitable, and that it's not an if they will come out, but a when they will come out. One place that we see this theme is in the 1941 movie The Wolfman, which features a poem which states, "Even a man who is pure of heart and says his prayers by night can become a wolf when the wolfsbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright." We can see that this poem is meant to represent the idea that even somebody who's pure in nature will have these bestial urges come out eventually, as represented by the wolf. In the later films, they had changed the last line of the poem to, "and the moon is full and bright." This change thus equated the werewolf's transformation with the common inevitability of the full moon. This idea of the werewolf coming out so often as once a month due to the full moon is often meant to represent the inevitability of this beast that we have within coming out and hurting others. Unlike most werewolf literature, Silver doesn't need the influence of a full moon to transform into her werewolf counterpart, which brings us to Silver's relationship with her lycanthropy. The first unique aspect to Silver's lycanthropy is that it seems that she didn't get it through the typical method of being bit by another werewolf. Instead, it appears that she got it hereditarily and has always been a werewolf, as seen in a conversation with Graves.
You like being a werewolf?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I've never not been one. Imagine if I asked you how you liked being a human.
I'd say that humans are generally awful with moments of surprising compassion, and that we would all probably be better off if 90% of us were replaced by cats.
The second unique thing about her werewolf transformation is that unlike traditional werewolf transformations, she doesn't require the presence of a full moon to transform into her werewolf state. We can see this in two voice lines, one spoken by Silver, where she says this,
"There needs a full moon."
and another spoken by the patron, where they say this.
Silver, you've never been a slave to the moon, and you refuse to be the Hidden King's thrall. Destroy him, complete the ritual, and live free.
Instead, her werewolf transformation comes from generating bloodlust. Now, I don't typically like to analyze the abilities that heroes have in-game, as it's unclear if they're necessarily canon, this being due to the fact that a lot of the abilities in the game are often subject to be changed or reworked for the sake of balancing. That being said, I'm willing to make an exception here due to the nature of Silver's ultimate requirements. Most ultimates in Deadlock are on a timer, being able to be used once that timer has reached 0. And while Silver's ultimate is also on a cooldown, it has an additional condition that must be met before it can be used. Silver's ultimate ability states that dealing damage generates bloodlust, increased at low health. At max bloodlust, you automatically cast Lycan Curse, which causes her to transform into her werewolf counterpart. This concept of doing harm and gaining bloodlust, causing Silver to turn into her werewolf form against her control, fits into this werewolf trope of the uncontrollable beast within. Silver does have an interaction with Haze where she states that she's able to control her lycanthropy.
Can you control the beast?
We talking lycanthropy or degeneracy? Because I'm good on the first. On the second.
Lycanthropy.
Yeah, no worries there.
However, Silver has also gone on to show that she's not exactly good at saying what she believes.
This should be easy. It won't be, but I'm really good at lying to myself.
Additionally, Silver has a number of voice lines she says when her ultimate activates, many of which make it sound like she has no will in her transformation, and that it is provoked by the violence she's forced to output due to the nature of her environment, both as a bounty hunter and a ritual participant.
Oh God, not again. I thought I had this under control. They asked for this.
Silver's werewolf being more easy to provoke at lower health also poses some interesting interactions. All Deadlock heroes have special voice lines for when they use their ultimate ability at low health, known as desperation lines. Silver's ultimate ability has this unique mechanic tied to her critical health factor. Her desperation lines come off even more like her bestial form is something that she has no control over.
You shouldn't have made me mad. You shouldn't have poked the bear. You're not giving me any choice.
Silver shows in a lot of her personal voice lines that the violence that she enacts, the violence that causes her beast to come out, is something that she has to do to make ends meet.
I'm doing this for money, and, well, just money. There have got to be easier ways to get my life together. Why does this have to be the one thing I'm good at? Why couldn't I have stuck with piano? I'm desperate, but not that desperate. Well, I am that desperate, but I also have self-preservation.
Additionally, in a conversation with Seven, she makes it very apparent that this is something that she has to do to sustain herself.
Keeping a close eye on me.
Seven, I don't do my job out of a sense of justice. I do it to pay rent. And if we win today, that won't be a problem anymore. So trust me, I got no problem working with you if it means we win.
Silver is also known to be one to overindulge in a lot of substance abuse. The first line in her bio being, Lila Silver's a mess. She drinks too much, she smokes too much. It's so prevalent that there are a few voice lines that comment on her overindulgence of alcohol.
So should I be worried that you were sloppy enough to end up in Lost Whisper? Or glad that you're competent enough to escape?
How charming. What are you planning on asking the patron for, Silver? A new liver?
Never met someone whose hair smelled like bourbon.
One conversation in particular that she has with Apollo, she even mentions that she uses the alcohol as a way to numb herself.
Are you drunk?
No.
Have you been drinking?
Obviously.
It dulls the mind.
Dulls a lot more than that.
You're going to get us killed.
Relax, kid. We'll be fine.
This repeated substance abuse and discussion of dulling the mind is just another piece of evidence towards the idea that Silver's beast is something that she loathes having to come out, but can't stop due to her financial responsibility on it. Typically, our werewolf is a slave to their beast due to its inevitable arrival during a full moon. What makes Silver's beast different is her beast theoretically could be stopped at any time, but never will because her nature as a bounty hunter requires her to enact this violence. And we can see that this violence will never be stopped, as it's the only thing she knows how to do to make ends meet and keep herself alive. Thus, like the werewolf whose beast is caused by the inevitability of the moon cycle, Silver's beast is inevitable due to the nature of her existence. I hope you all enjoyed this Deadlock lore analysis video. I want to say thanks again to David for allowing me to interview him for this subject. I also want to thank the New York Public Library system, which allowed me to get a lot of the research material that I used in this video. That being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.